Her husband betrayed her. Her best friend destroyed her, but she didn't break alone. The hotel corridor was too quiet for a Friday night. Cold light washed over the bluish-grey carpet, creating a sterile glow that clashed with the storm inside her chest. Clara walked slowly, almost dragging her feet as if every step carried a weight she hadn't prepared to bear. The keycard trembled between her fingers, its plastic edge cutting lightly into her skin. It wasn't nerves. Not really. It was something deeper, an ache she had been pretending not to hear for far too long. She stopped in front of room 614. The gold numbers caught the hallway light and shimmered faintly, forcing her to blink once, twice. Clara drew in a long breath, her 10th attempt since stepping out of the elevator, but the air refused to settle in her lungs. It felt like breathing through sand, dense, heavy, silent. The door was slightly open, barely noticeable, but open. She exhaled slowly, the sound small and controlled, enough to remind her why she was there in the first place. The hotel receipt she found in Daniel's jacket pocket, the reservation under his name with Melissa's phone number attached. The message he tried to hide, one she caught only because the mirror in their living room betrayed him. Clara hadn't come to fight, hadn't come to scream, hadn't come to beg for explanations. She came to see with her own eyes. To face the truth everyone around her seemed to sense, everyone except her. Inside she heard muffled voices, quick bursts of laughter. One voice was sharp, feminine, intimate, familiar in a way that made Clara's stomach turn. The other was low, calm, with that same gentle cadence that once soothed her. Daniel's voice. Her hand tightened around the keycard until the plastic flexed with a faint crack. For a moment, she imagined dropping it, turning away, pretending none of this was real. Pretending was easier. Pretending kept her world intact. But something inside her, something quiet, wounded, ancient, refused to look away anymore. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was disappointment so concentrated it felt like pressure beneath her ribs. A bubble ready to burst, held together only by the thin membrane of denial. And that membrane was one push away from breaking. Clara placed her hand on the doorknob. Her nails clicked lightly against the metal, exposing the tremor running through her fingers. She pressed slowly, slow enough not to draw attention, firm enough to cross the point of no ritorno. The door gave way a few millimeters, as if the room itself had been holding its breath with her. The smell reached her first, a sweet, warm, woody perfume. Melissa's perfume, the same scent she had worn since college, familiar, loyal, unmistakable. Clara had always found it beautiful. Now it filled the air like a silent accusation. Then came the second scent, Daniel's, hotel soap mixed with something intimate, something she had known for years without ever naming. Her breath stalled. Something inside the room fell, a remote, a piece of clothing, something small. More laughter followed, soft, private, close. So close, it sliced through the air like a thin blade. Clara pushed the door a little more. She didn't want to enter. She just needed a second. A single second to let reality settle inside her bones. But reality didn't wait. Through the narrow opening, she saw their reflection in the mirror across the room. Not their faces, not at first. Their bodies, their hands, the absence of space between them. Melissa back against the wall, laughing as she fixed her blouse. Her brown hair spilled over her shoulders, exactly the way it had since the day Clara met her. Daniel's hands around Melissa's waist, firm, familiar, comfortable. As if that touch belonged there, as if it had belonged there for months. Clara felt something electric run through her chest. Not pain, not exactly. It was awareness, sharp, unforgiving. Like all the puzzle pieces she refused to assemble suddenly forced themselves into place. She made no sound. Didn't step back, didn't drop the key, didn't speak. She simply stood there, frozen in the doorway, as if the floor had fused with her feet. The worst part wasn't the touch. Wasn't his hands on Melissa's body. Wasn't the closeness or the laughter. It was the look. Daniel looked at Melissa the way he used to look at Clara years ago, when gestures still carried light, when the marriage held dreams instead of excuses. promises instead of silence. It was a look born of familiarity, of trust, of something cultivated quietly, piece by piece, the kind of look that isn't built in days or weeks, but in months, in secrets, in silent betrayals. Clara didn't know how long she remained there. Seconds, minutes, long enough for her vision to steady, to stop shaking, to turn cold. What finally snapped the moment open was Melissa's voice, sweet, almost childlike. "Close the door, babe. It's cold." Babe. The word hit Clara first, then hit Daniel. He turned slightly. Not fully, not fast, just enough for the mirror to reveal his eyes. Dark, dilated, confused. For a full second, Daniel didn't understand what he was seeing. Clara's face. Her hand on the door, the keycard on the floor, the silent hallway. And her, standing there, looking at him the way someone looks at the end of something they never thought would break. Shock washed over his face slowly, like a wave with weight. "Clara?" His voice didn't come angry, or defensive, or rehearsed. It came broken. But nothing in that room was whole anymore. The door opened completely, and her world split open with it. Hours before everything fell apart, Clara's day looked exactly like all the others. One of those mornings where routine moves quietly, pretending to be stability. She woke before her alarm, the way she had for months, and stared at the ceiling for a few seconds, trying to understand what kept pulling her out of sleep so early. It wasn't anxiety, but it wasn't peace either. It was something in between, like her body sensed a truth her mind still refused to face. The bedroom was cold. The half-open window let in a damp breeze that made the curtains sway, casting shifting shadows across the walls. Daniel slept beside her, turned away, breathing far too calmly for someone who claimed to be exhausted all the time. She watched him for a moment, the outline of his back, the way the sheet rested on his waist, the stillness of his hand. There was a physical distance between them now. Small, but undeniable. Enough for her to feel it like a draft seeping through a closed door. Clara got out of bed quietly. The kitchen felt just as silent. The wall clock still showed 9 a.m., but she knew it had stopped the night before, yet another thing in the house that needed care she hadn't managed to give. She made coffee in the silence that had become their morning soundtrack. The warm smell filled the space, stirring a faint, almost melancholic nostalgia. Daniel appeared 10 minutes later. He didn't greet her, didn't ask how she slept, didn't ask anything. He sat at the table, picked up his mug, and drank the first sip without ever lifting his eyes to hers. It was the sort of quiet that didn't feel natural anymore. They shared the same house, but not the same life. Clara tried. She talked about an event she needed to organize at work, mentioned the idea of renovating the guest room, brought up her mother's call from the night before. Daniel responded with short, detached answers, words that sounded automatic, rehearsed, lifeless. He wasn't there. Not emotionally, not in the way that mattered. She studied him in silence, the way he avoided eye contact, the way his fingers moved over his phone with obsessive focus, the small smile he gave whenever a message popped up. A smile that wasn't for her. A smile that didn't belong to anything involving the two of them. "Are you working today?" Clara asked, keeping her tone neutral. "I need to take care of a few things," he said without looking up. A few things. That was how he named his distance. That was how he justified late nights, strange hours, and the coldness that had replaced gestures that once defined their relationship. Clara finished her coffee quietly, swallowing not just the bitterness of the drink, but the bitterness of everything he wasn't saying. She felt a pressure build in her chest. Not pain, not yet, but the tightening sense that something was approaching, something she wasn't ready for. A few minutes later, Melissa arrived. Melissa always arrived, unannounced. Without knocking, without hesitation. She walked in smiling, hair loose, wearing that same sweet perfume that, later, would make Clara sick just by existing. Melissa hugged her with enthusiasm, but Clara felt something off immediately. The touch was too quick, not affectionate, more like an obligation being rushed through. Melissa started talking, work updates, difficult clients, how tired she felt. Her hands moved too much, her voice too fast, her posture too restless. But she didn't ask about Daniel. Not that morning. And that was the first fracture in the day. Clara watched as Melissa poured herself coffee, stirring it as if searching for an answer in the liquid. Daniel stood up soon after, saying he needed to leave. Melissa looked away for 1 second, just one. But Clara noticed. She had known Melissa since they were 14. She recognized the micro gestures, the sudden tension, the way silence shifts when it isn't innocent anymore. Daniel leaned toward Clara and kissed her forehead, a gesture too symbolic for someone who emotionally checked out months ago, and walked out the door. Clara stared at the door after it closed, feeling a strange emptiness spread through her chest. Melissa kept stirring her coffee, eyes fixed on the cup, shoulders tight. "You look tired," Clara said. Melissa smiled, but the smile didn't touch her eyes. "Just a busy week. Nothing serious." But it was serious. Clara knew. Her intuition, the same intuition that had never failed her, pressed against her ribs like a warning she couldn't ignore. Something was wrong, very wrong, and painfully silent. "Where are you going today?" Clara asked casually. Melissa hesitated. "Just a second." But enough. "I have a meeting. Then I'll probably go home." Clara caught the pause, caught the effort behind the casual tone, caught the inconsistency in someone who was always punctual, organized, precise. Melissa never hesitated when talking about her schedule. Never. But that day she did, and that was the second fracture, the kind that doesn't break anything yet, but makes the entire structure tremble. After Melissa left, Clara remained in the kitchen, staring at her friend's half-finished cup of coffee. A dull pressure formed in her chest, like something inside her was trying to push its way out. That was the beginning of doubt, the kind that starts quietly, the kind that expands until it becomes certainty. She tried to distract herself, but her thoughts kept circling the same points. Daniel distant, Melissa off, the hidden messages, the strange schedules, the perfume in the car, the heavy silences. By late afternoon, Clara felt an urge to confirm something. She didn't know exactly what, but she knew she needed to act. Daniel had left his phone on the table before going out. There was no passcode. He used to say he trusted her. Maybe he had once. When Clara tapped the screen, a notification appeared. A short message, a heart, a pet name she'd never heard before. The contact saved under a single initial, an initial that could belong to anyone. But Clara knew. She knew before she finished reading. It was in that moment the day began to crack apart. Not completely, not violently. More like a thin fracture running through glass, so quiet you only hear it once it's too late. Then came the hotel receipt, the reservation, the date, the time, her best friend's phone number linked to the room. That's when Clara decided to go. No warning, no confrontation, no demand for explanations, just to see. Seeing was necessary, and seeing would destroy everything. The night before she went to the hotel was anything but calm. Clara tried to sleep, but her body refused. She tossed and turned, searching for a position that offered even a moment of relief. None did. The pillow was too warm, the blanket too heavy, the room too quiet. And still, every part of her vibrated like something inside her was preparing to break. Daniel had come home late again. He moved the way he always did now, quietly, carefully, lowering his steps as if afraid the light might expose something. He set his phone on the nightstand and got into bed without letting their skin meet. No goodnight kiss, no tenderness, just the distant presence of someone who no longer knew how to inhabit the same emotional space. Clara kept her eyes closed, pretending to sleep. She didn't want conversation. She didn't want excuses. She wanted to observe. As his breathing fell into a steady rhythm, she realized there was a pattern, a choreography of avoidance. As if Daniel had memorized the movements required to keep his distance unnoticed. Quiet steps, short showers, that almost sterile scent on his skin, so neutral it felt like an attempt to erase traces, She knew. She didn't have proof, but she had the visceral certainty that comes before a revelation. Her body knew what her mind wasn't ready to accept. When sleep finally came, it was thin and brittle, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. And that's exactly what happened. A little after 6 a.m., she woke to the subtle buzz of a message. Daniel's phone. Again. He moved quickly, too quickly for someone supposedly half asleep. He grabbed the phone carefully, turned his back to her, and angled the screen away. The glow of the display lit the curve of his neck, highlighting the faint tension in his shoulder. A tiny, involuntary contraction Clara noticed instantly. He typed a short reply and got out of bed faster than he had in months, especially on a Saturday. Clara opened her eyes slowly, as if waking at that moment. "Heading out?" she asked, her voice grainy with sleep. He hesitated. "Just enough. I just need to take care of something. I won't be long." She nodded without pushing. She watched everything. The way he chose neutral clothes, checked his phone twice, exhaled softly before leaving. Small details, but enough. Clara got up too. While she drank her coffee, her heartbeat was steady, not racing but firm, like it was trying to support her through the shift between suspicion and certainty. The world around her felt like a scene moving in slow motion, the whistle of the kettle, the creaking of the wooden chair, the distant hum of a car outside. Everything sounded like the score of a moment that precedes revelation. When she opened the closet, she saw his jacket where he always left it. Something stiff inside the pocket caught her attention, a folded slip of paper. She pulled it out slowly. A receipt. Hotel Marina Plaza, dated last night. At the exact time he said he was handling an unexpected issue, a reservation that wasn't hers. Clara felt the air leave her lungs. The room seemed to tilt slightly, like the floor had shifted a few millimeters under her feet. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the paper for several seconds. There was nothing dramatic about it, no lipstick stains, no love notes. But betrayals rarely reveal themselves through theatrics. They reveal themselves through small, irrefutable truths. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and let the realization settle. No tears came, only clarity, a clarity sharp enough to redefine everything. Daniel's phone buzzed again. Clara almost ignored it, but something pulled her toward it. No passcode. A single notification from someone saved as M. A letter that could mean anyone, but not that day, not in that silence. She opened the conversation. Short messages, intimate, effortless, written in the rhythm of someone who knew how to hide. Then came the photo, a mirror selfie, not explicit, but undeniably personal. A shoulder, a floral dress, a phone case in a familiar shade of blue. Melissa had that case, for months. They'd bought it together, laughed at the cashier about matching accessories. Now the memory felt cruel. Clara set the phone aside. She didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't break. She didn't even look for explanations. There was a strange calm inside her, the kind that comes when someone who's been drowning for months finally reaches the surface. She grabbed her bag and walked out of the house without fully knowing where she was going. The early morning sun was bright but cold. Clara got into her car, inhaled deeply, and almost without thinking, typed the hotel's name into the GPS. The beginning of the end had arrived, quietly, inevitably. It took her 20 minutes to reach the hotel's underground garage. The smell of gasoline and damp concrete clung to the air, an odd contrast to the sharp clarity in her mind. Clara stepped into the elevator and watched the numbers rise one by one. Each floor felt like a layer of understanding she had avoided for months. When the doors opened on the 6th floor, her heartbeat steadied, firm, almost methodical. She wasn't there to make a scene. She wasn't there to save anything. She wasn't there for closure. She was there to face what needed to be faced. Clara walked down the hallway with slow, deliberate steps, each meter a confirmation of something she had known long before she admitted it. The carpet swallowed the sound of her footsteps, amplifying the silence around her. And then she saw it. Room 614. The cracked door, the muffled laughter, the sweet perfume. the mirrored reflection. His hand on her best friend's waist. Watching all of it carved something open inside her. Not just pain, but a raw, illuminated truth. The kind that doesn't arrive gently. The kind that arrives to break. And when Daniel finally noticed her, when he saw her silhouette in the doorway, when his eyes widened like the world had collapsed onto him, that's when everything truly began. Because for Clara, the betrayal wasn't the hotel room. It was the entire path that led her there. Every ignored detail, every forced silence, every glance that turned away. The door swung open completely, and nothing could ever be closed again. The silence inside the room didn't arrive right away. There was first a sharp, brittle sound, the kind of noise that marks the end of something that never should have existed. Melissa stepped back, as if searching for shelter inside a room suddenly too small to hold her guilt. Daniel seemed to forget how to breathe, and Clara, in absolute contrast, remained still. So still it was unsettling. It wasn't calm. It was the stillness before an earthquake. Daniel tried to speak. He might have said her name, or maybe only managed a broken syllable. Melissa pulled down her blouse with trembling hands, as if hiding exposed skin could undo the truth. Clara didn't move. She didn't react. She didn't blink. She simply watched. As if cataloguing every detail, restoring order to her internal chaos before allowing any expression to surface. "Clara," Daniel finally said, his voice fractured. She raised her hand, a small gesture but enough to silence him. She didn't want empty words. She didn't want improvised excuses. She didn't want stories patched together in panic. She wanted facts. Clara stepped into the room. Just one step, enough for both of them to feel the weight of their choice. Melissa lowered her gaze. Daniel hesitated before stepping away from her, as if that single movement was already a confession. "I just need to understand," Clara said. Her voice was steady, so steady that Melissa instinctively looked up. "How long?" Neither of them answered at first. It was a simple question, but it carried everything left unspoken over the past months. Daniel rubbed his face, searching for a response he couldn't find. Melissa spoke first, and that alone said everything. "It wasn't planned," she whispered. Her voice was fragile, halting, yet Clara caught an undertone of something that felt like defense, an attempt to soften a wound that could never be softened. "I didn't ask if it was planned," Clara replied, still calm. "I asked how long." Melissa swallowed hard. Daniel closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if trying to collect strength from a place inside him that no longer existed. Then he said it. "A few months." Clara's expression didn't change. But something inside her broke with surgical precision. Months, not weeks, not a mistake, not a moment of weakness. Months. She nodded slowly, and for a moment no one could tell if it was acceptance or the beginning of something deeper. Clara turned, unhurried, and walked out of the room. The hallway felt heavier, as if gravity itself had shifted. Daniel followed her, saying her name softly, worried about who might be listening. But Clara didn't care about witnesses. Her pain wasn't performative. It wasn't loud. It wasn't meant to be seen. It was silent, organized, and unbearably deep. The kind of pain carved in someone who has been shattered quietly for far too long. Clara didn't cry in the car. She didn't call anyone. She didn't fall apart. She just drove with no destination in mind, watching the city slide past her windows like a sequence of disconnected scenes. Headlights, pedestrians, bars, storefronts, life unfolding, while hers seemed suspended in mid-air. She eventually parked on a quiet, tree-lined street, where a soft breeze rustled the leaves overhead. The gentle sound pulled forward an old memory. She and Melissa sitting in that same spot years earlier, talking about everything they wanted to accomplish. The memory arrived suddenly, uninvited, unsoftened, cruel, and real. Clara closed her eyes, letting the past collide violently with the present. She tried to revisit every conversation she'd had with Melissa over the last few months. The confidences, the confessions, the messages, the coffees shared, the times Melissa pretended to care about Daniel's growing distance, asking, Is everything okay between you two? Looking back, there had already been a shadow there. She just hadn't seen it. Because she trusted too much. Because she believed in the loyalty they'd built over the years. Because she never imagined someone so close could cross a line so deep. While she mentally stitched together every fragment of the last few months, her phone vibrated. Daniel. Clara looked at the screen with a strange, almost anesthetized calm before answering. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice tight with contained panic. "Somewhere in the city," she said. It wasn't evasive. It was true. She didn't know where she was emotionally. Not anymore. "We need to talk, please. I made a mistake, Clara. I can fix this." Clara closed her eyes. Exhaustion softened her features, slowing every muscle in her face. But still, no tears. "I don't know what you think you can fix," she replied. "This isn't a crack in the wall, it's a demolition." Daniel was silent for several seconds. A silence full of fear. Not fear of losing her, but fear of the consequences of the choice he made. "She doesn't mean—" he began, but Clara cut him off. "Don't finish that sentence," she said firmly. "Don't shrink what you did just to make it sound less intentional. You two didn't fall into this. You built space for it to happen." Another silence. Daniel exhaled, searching for a weak spot in the emotional fortress Clara was building in front of him, but she offered none. "I wanted to talk to you before—" He tried, but even he heard how hollow it sounded. "But you didn't," she said. "And what's broken now isn't communication, it's respect." Clara hung up before the conversation could turn into empty begging. The phone buzzed again immediately, but she ignored it. Silence was her only protection. She drove to her sister's house, not to tell her anything, but simply to breathe somewhere not saturated with fresh lies. Her sister welcomed her without questions, offering space on the couch and a cup of tea that sat untouched, while Clara tried to organize the flood of thoughts coming in waves, out of order. Then she remembered a conversation with Melissa, weeks earlier. "Has Daniel been acting weird with you? I noticed a few things. If you ever need to talk, I'm here, always. Men sometimes just need space." Which meant Melissa had been advising her on how to handle Daniel's distance while simultaneously being the reason for it. Every memory resurfacing now carried a new layer of humiliation, but also a new layer of clarity. The kind of clarity that stiffens the spine, that sets boundaries, that rearranges what once felt chaotic. This was the beginning of the spiral, a spiral that wouldn't be only about betrayal, but about much bigger revelations. Because that night, while trying to sleep at her sister's house, Clara felt something new, an intuition, quiet, sharp, dangerously precise. The lie wasn't confined to the hotel room. There was more, and discovering it was no longer a possibility. It was inevitable. The night at her sister's house was far too long to be called rest. Clara turned over again and again on the makeshift bed, trying to find a position that would allow her thoughts to settle. Nothing worked. Her mind replayed every detail she had seen at the hotel. Daniel's hand on Melissa's waist, the muted laughter, the way Melissa flinched the moment she realized Clara was standing there. Each memory echoed with painful clarity, refusing to fade. A little after 6 in the morning, Clara gave up on sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, watching the faint light filter through the window. A car passed outside, the muffled sound dissolving into the quiet walls. Clara exhaled deeply, elbows on her knees, hands covering her face for a few seconds. It felt like she was gathering fragments of courage from places inside herself she didn't know how to reach. She needed to understand, not just see, understand. And that need had nothing to do with forgiveness or reconciliation. It had everything to do with dignity. Clara was tired of being the last to know the story of her own life. When she stepped out of the room, she found her sister making coffee. The familiar smell hit her with a gentle kind of nostalgia, like a distant memory from a time when trust wasn't an act of faith, but a given. Her sister watched her carefully, the way someone who recognizes pain does, but refuses to press. "Do you want to talk?" she asked softly, offering more through the gesture than through the question. Clara shook her head. "Not yet. I need to organize everything first." Her sister didn't insist, just nodded with genuine understanding, and left Clara with the silence she seemed to need. Clara left the house shortly after, taking only her phone, her wallet, and a determination she hadn't felt in months. She paused beside her car, wondering if she truly wanted to open doors that might reveal even harder truths. But there was no going back. What she saw at the hotel wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something bigger. She got into the car and drove downtown. She didn't know where she was headed until she realized her own hands had chosen the route, Melissa's office building, not because she wanted another confrontation, but because something about that place felt unfinished, like a missing piece in a puzzle she hadn't realized she was solving. She parked across the street and watched the morning unfold. Employees arriving early, security guards chatting at the entrance, people greeting each other with rehearsed smiles. The building's glass facade reflected a city still waking up. Clara stayed there in silence, waiting for a sign. It arrived unexpectedly. A worker exited through the side door, carrying small boxes of archived files. He placed them on a metal cart and went back inside, leaving the door slightly ajar. It wasn't related to what she was looking for, not directly, but it was a breach, and breaches mattered. Clara took a slow breath, looked around, and crossed the street. She slipped through the side door and walked down the quiet corridors. She didn't know what she was searching for, only that she needed to be there for something to surface. And something did. Melissa was in a room at the far end, arguing with someone. The door wasn't closed enough to block the sound. Clara recognized Melissa's voice immediately. Nervous, rushed, almost desperate, she approached slowly, carefully, the way someone crosses emotional minefields. "She wasn't supposed to find out like that," Melissa was saying. "You said you would handle it." Clara stopped instantly. Her breath caught. Another voice responded. Male. Not Daniel. "I tried, but she's smart. She always has been. We couldn't keep this hidden forever." A chill ran through Clara's spine. Melissa answered sharper now. "Now everything is in her hands. If she decides to dig, she's going to find the rest." The rest. Clara's knees weakened. A cold electric tremor moved through her body. She didn't want to walk into that office. Not like this. Not right now. But there was no turning back anymore. Something larger than betrayal was unfolding, and Clara was already inside it. Clara pushed the door open slowly. Melissa and the man inside, Daniel's company's attorney, someone Clara had seen only a handful of times, turned toward her at the same moment. Melissa's expression of shock bordered on theatrical. The attorney went visibly pale. Clara closed the door behind her with quiet finality. "What exactly was I supposed to find out?" she asked, her voice unnervingly calm, not because there was no pain left, but because there was too much. Melissa parted her lips, but no sound emerged. The attorney straightened his tie in a nervous reflex that betrayed everything he tried to hide. "Clara, maybe we should talk somewhere more private," he suggested. "I don't think privacy is your specialty," she replied, her gaze fixed on Melissa. A heavy silence settled over the room, dense, almost physical. Melissa looked away, touching her own wrist as though searching for steadiness she no longer had. "This wasn't supposed to happen like this," Melissa whispered. "Not this way." "Then explain to me what the right way was supposed to be," Clara said, "because I actually want to understand." The attorney inhaled deeply. "Clara, a few weeks ago, Daniel signed several important documents involving the company. Documents that shouldn't have been signed without your awareness." Clara studied his face carefully, trying to decode the meaning hidden behind his cautious tone. "What kind of documents?" He hesitated. "Contracts, transfers, statements that influence marital assets." Clara's mind flicked through possibilities like pages turning too quickly. And why would Melissa be involved in any of this? Melissa closed her eyes briefly, as if bracing herself. Daniel needed someone to witness the signatures, someone he trusted. "Trusted," Clara repeated, tasting the bitterness of the word. "Trusted enough to betray his wife?" Melissa didn't answer. The attorney attempted to interject. "It's not as simple as—" "It is simple," Clara cut him off. "You both signed illegal documents using my trust as a shield, and while doing that, he was with her." The silence that followed was the confirmation no one dared voice. The pieces clicked together with almost cruel speed. Daniel hadn't been distancing himself only emotionally. He had been distancing himself legally, preparing his exit strategy, structuring a life without her behind her back. And Melissa wasn't just the emotional betrayal. She was part of the operation. Clara took a few seconds to process it. The world felt heavier, but also sharper, clearer. "You thought I wouldn't find out?" she finally asked. "You really believed I would keep living beside a man who betrays me while he reorganizes our entire life without my knowledge?" Melissa stepped forward, maybe to explain, maybe to beg, but Clara lifted her hand again, the same gesture that had silenced Daniel in the hotel. "I don't want excuses," she said calmly. "I want the truth." Melissa inhaled shakily before speaking, her voice trembling. "He said he was going to leave you, that he'd tell you everything. He told me you weren't invested in the marriage anymore." Clara blinked once slowly, as if testing the weight of the word. "Invested," she repeated. "That's the narrative you're using?" Melissa tried to respond, but the sentence collapsed before it could form. There was no story she could build that would survive the truth Clara had witnessed. Silence expanded inside the room, filling every inch of the air. And that was when Clara realized the betrayal wasn't only physical. It wasn't only emotional. It was strategic, calculated, and profoundly cruel. It wasn't a failure of the marriage, it was a choice. And that choice had been made long before she opened the hotel door. The walk back to the car wasn't just a physical movement. It felt like a process, a slow descent into full awareness. Every step echoed with the clarity of someone finally understanding the true size of the fall. Clara crossed the parking lot slowly, fully aware that something inside her had shifted in an irreversible way. It wasn't just the sting of betrayal. She had almost expected that ever since Daniel began pulling away. What gutted her now wasn't the emotional infidelity. It was the strategic betrayal, the calculated nature of it, the way disloyalty had fused with manipulation. She had been deceived not only as a wife, but as a person. When she got into the car, she didn't start the engine. She placed both hands on the steering wheel and leaned her head back against the seat. For a moment, her entire body pulsed as though it was trying to process more than it could bear. The silence around her felt so heavy that she had to inhale deeply just to confirm she was still there, alive, present, intact. Her phone vibrated. Not Daniel, not Melissa. A number she didn't recognize. Clara hesitated, but something in her said the call was part of what needed to be uncovered. "Clara," a soft, careful female voice said, "It's Renata. I work with Daniel, but I also know Melissa. We need to talk." Clara's breath faltered. She didn't know Renata, but she recognized the tone, the voice of someone who knows more than they ever wanted to. "How did you get my number?" Clara asked, keeping her voice steady. "I asked someone at reception," Renata replied. "I'm not trying to get involved, but I think you deserve to know a few things." Clara closed her eyes. "I'm listening." A short pause followed. Not the pause of hesitation, but the pause of someone carrying a burden heavier than their own conscience. "Daniel and Melissa, this isn't recent," Renata said. "At least not the way it looks. They've been meeting long before that renovation you two did at home, before the period when you thought he was just overwhelmed with work." Clara didn't speak. She let each word settle like cold water seeping through cracks. "They used work as an excuse," Renata continued. "Late meetings, quick trips, odd schedules. A lot of people noticed. No one said anything because, well, nobody wanted to be involved. But I saw things, conversations, looks, deleted messages on his computer before meetings. And when he started signing those documents, things got stranger." Clara tried to keep her breathing steady, but her body trembled. "What documents exactly?" she asked. Renata hesitated, her voice dropping even lower, as if the walls themselves could overhear. "Daniel has been transferring part of your joint assets into a private investment account, one that isn't in both of your names. A beat. He put only his name and Melissa's. The internal explanation was legal security for a future project. But people talk, and I know what I saw. Clara felt her stomach twist sharply. The betrayal was no longer emotional. It had become something far more deliberate, a sustained intention to erase her from her own life, not just emotionally, not just relationally, but financially, legally. "Why are you telling me this?" Clara asked, fighting the tremor in her voice. Renata drew a breath that sounded weighted with guilt. "Because no one deserves to go through this blind," she said, "and because I'd feel complicit if I stayed silent." Clara didn't respond right away. When she finally did, her voice came from a place deep, quiet, almost ancient. "Thank you." Renata ended the call without another word. Clara stayed there for several minutes, unable to move. Then she set the phone down on the seat beside her and pressed her hands to her face. That's when the tears finally came. Not violently, but with the intensity of someone who has held everything in for far too long. The tears weren't for the marriage, they were for her dignity. When she finally managed to steady herself, she started the car and drove aimlessly. She passed familiar streets from her childhood, small stores she'd visited for years, the park where she and Melissa used to walk on Sunday mornings. Every corner of the city felt contaminated now, a landscape coated with memories that carried a new, bitter taste. A taste of falsehood, of layers she'd never known were there, simply because she trusted too much. Clara parked in front of her building, but didn't get out immediately. She stared at the facade, trying to recognize the place she had lived all these years. The bedroom where she had shared so many nights with Daniel. The living room filled with laughter, tears, and plans. The kitchen where ordinary conversations masked widening gaps. Every room felt like a different place now, a different home, a different life. When she finally went inside, Daniel was sitting on the couch. He stood abruptly when he saw her walk through the door. "Clara," he said, taking a step toward her. She lifted her hand, the gesture that had already become a boundary. "Don't come near me." Daniel froze, torn between guilt and a late comprehension of the destruction he had caused. "I need to explain," he insisted. Clara looked at him, but her eyes held something new. Not anger, not hatred, not emotional collapse. Absence. "You don't need to explain anything," she said. "I know enough." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, anxious, grasping for words that didn't exist. "It's not what you think. I was confused. Everything was difficult between us, and by the time I realized what was happening, I was already too deep into it. I never wanted to hurt you." Clara let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. It was the sound of someone recognizing the absurdity of hearing small excuses after being wounded by such enormous truths. "You didn't want to hurt me," she repeated calmly. "You betrayed me for months. You used me as emotional cover while signing illegal documents. You shared secrets with someone else while stripping our home of meaning. And now you want to stand here and tell me you didn't want to hurt me?" Daniel opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Clara felt something inside her settle. Not strength, but clarity. The kind of clarity that only appears when a cycle dies completely. "You made your choice," she said, "and now I'm making mine." Daniel stepped forward as if trying to block her path, not with force, but with presence. "Your choice? What are you choosing?" She held his gaze, steady and unwavering. "I choose to not stay in this story." He reached out, trying to touch her arm, but Clara stepped back instantly. "You can't just—" The sentence collapsed halfway through. Clara walked to the bedroom, took a small suitcase from the closet, and began placing clothes inside it with deliberate, quiet precision. Each folded piece felt like part of a ritual of ending. Daniel stood at the doorway, watching with a mixture of desperation and disbelief. "Clara, wait, please, we can fix this. We can try therapy, we can talk, we can—" She kept packing, saying nothing for several seconds, letting the silence speak for her. When she finally did respond, her voice was soft, but unshakable. "I don't want to fix what you destroyed deliberately. I don't want to repair what you dismantled while looking me in the eyes. I don't want to rebuild a life with someone who planned his escape behind my back. She closed the suitcase with a firm motion. I won't negotiate my dignity. Daniel placed a hand against the doorframe, as if he needed the support to keep from sinking to the floor. You're leaving just like that? Clara met his eyes for the last time that night. It's not just like that, it's finally. And she walked out, leaving behind not only a broken marriage, but the version of herself who once believed that love required blindness. Clara left the house for the second time in less than 2 days, but this time everything felt different. The first time she carried suspicion. Now she carried certainty. The suitcase in the trunk wasn't just luggage, it was a border. A line between the life she had lived and the one she was stepping into. Driving that night felt like crossing an invisible bridge. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She didn't even feel anger. What filled her instead was a silence so deep it seemed to expand inside her, claiming the places where fear once lived. City lights streaked across the car windows like distorted fragments, blurred by the emotional distance she carried from the world outside. Instead of going back to her sister's house, Clara drove somewhere she hadn't been in years, her grandmother's house. It had been empty since her grandmother passed, still in the family's name, but untouched. The rusted gate, the overgrown yard, the closed windows, none of it deterred her. She didn't need comfort. She needed space, air, a place untouched by Daniel or Melissa. She unlocked the gate with an old key she kept in her wallet and pushed it open. The metal groaned loudly, echoing through the abandoned yard. Walking inside felt like crossing a threshold, between the pain still burning and the version of herself that was beginning to form. Inside, the air smelled of closed spaces, dust, old wood, memory. She remembered sleeping there as a teenager, her grandmother saying, "Some truths can only be heard in silence." Clara wasn't someone who believed in signs, not in a mystical way, but there was something about the house that matched the urgency within her. She turned on a single light in the living room. The rest of the house remained dark, as if honoring the quiet mourning she carried. She set her suitcase down, took off her shoes, and sat on the worn sofa. The rough fabric touched her skin with a strange familiarity. She exhaled slowly, letting the silence wrap around her. Her phone vibrated for the 3rd time since she left her home. Daniel's name lit up the screen. Clara didn't answer. She wanted to hear what he had to say, yes. But not now. Not like this. Not while she was rebuilding the outline of who she was. When the call ended, another began. Melissa. Clara watched the name on the screen as if it were written in a language she no longer understood. Foreign, meaningless, empty. She let it ring until it stopped. Then another vibration. A message. Clara opened it without hesitation. She needed to understand what kind of manipulation she would face in the coming days. "Daniel, I know you're hurting, but we need to talk. Please don't do anything impulsive." Clara exhaled, a sound halfway between disbelief and exhaustion. Impulsive was an ironic word coming from someone who spent months planning his lies. Another message arrived. "Daniel, I can explain everything. I don't want to do it over text. Tell me where you are." She cleared the notification without replying. Daniel wasn't seeking reconciliation. Not truly. He was seeking control. The same control he believed he always had, over her, over the story, over the version of the truth he wanted to manipulate. Clara closed her eyes and sank deeper into the sofa. A heavy fatigue spread across her body, as if every fiber had been stretched past its limit. She pressed a hand against her chest. Not in pain, but in silent reorganization, as if something inside her was being carefully removed. Eventually she stood and walked to the kitchen. The house was cold, but not in a way that hurt. She opened the window, letting in the night air. It touched her face sharply, and for the first time in a long time she felt something close to relief, not because of what had happened, but because she was finally somewhere where truth couldn't be avoided. She made tea. The simple mechanical act grounded her. While waiting for the water to boil, she went through the last days in her mind, piece by piece, like an emotional puzzle. The physical betrayal was horrifying, yes, but it wasn't the deepest wound. What hurt most was being used as emotional scaffolding while Daniel built a parallel life. It was sharing confidences with Melissa, while Melissa shared something else entirely with Daniel. It was being erased from documents without her knowledge, as if she were a disposable detail. Her grandmother's house seemed to amplify these thoughts, its walls holding space for quiet healing, not shallow or fast, but deep and structural. When the tea was ready, Clara sat again. She wrapped her hands around the cup, feeling warmth travel through her fingers, up her arms, a reminder that something in the world could still warm her. Her phone vibrated again, this time a voice message. She hesitated, then pressed play. Daniel's voice trembled with urgency. "Clara, I know you hate me right now. I deserve it. But you need to listen to me. This isn't just about us. It's not just about Melissa. There are things you don't know, things they did, that we did. I need to talk to you before you do something that can't be undone. Please." Clara stayed still. That wasn't remorse. That was fear. Daniel wasn't afraid of losing her emotionally. He had already abandoned the relationship long ago. He was afraid of the consequences, and that told her everything. Another message popped up. "Daniel, please, I'm not asking you to come back. I'm asking for a conversation. It's important." Clara understood in that moment. He wasn't afraid of heartbreak. He was afraid of exposure. She turned the phone face down. Then she walked to her grandmother's old room and turned on the light. The bed was still made, untouched by time. Photos on the wall showed her grandmother young, the newly built house, family gathered in years so distant they felt like another life. Clara walked to a shelf and picked up a wooden box. Inside were letters, photos, small objects her grandmother cherished. Among them she found a yellowed piece of paper with a handwritten quote, "Silence is not absence, it is preparation." Clara stared at the words for a long time. They didn't comfort her, they aligned with her. It was then she understood. The worst part had already happened. Now came the moment before the final break. The moment where everything organizes internally before being spoken aloud. The moment where the protagonist decides who she will be when she faces everyone involved. She placed the paper back into the box, breathed deeply, and for the first time since the hotel, she felt ready. Not to forgive, not to return, but to end, and ending required presence. The pre-climax had finished inside her. The world didn't know it yet, but something final had already settled in her bones. Clara woke up before sunrise. The silence in her grandmother's house felt different that morning, not heavy with pain anymore, but weighted with decision. The night before had worked like a filter. Everything that needed to be felt had been felt. Everything that needed to be processed had been processed. What remained now was action. She rose slowly, surprised by the steadiness in her body. Her face still carried the traces of exhaustion, but her eyes were clear in a way they hadn't been for months. When she looked at herself in the bathroom mirror, her reflection wasn't that of a victim anymore. It was the reflection of someone who finally knew exactly where she stood. She made a simple cup of coffee, drank it slowly. And while she did, her phone vibrated again and again. Daniel finally realizing the distance she had placed between them. Missed calls, unread messages, long voice notes she didn't bother opening. But there was one new notification. A short message from the last person she expected. Melissa. "Clara, I need to talk to you. Not about him. About me." Clara didn't reply, but the message confirmed something important. They both wanted to talk to her. Both wanted to reshape the narrative. Both wanted to soften their choices, reorganize their guilt, adjust their stories. But none of that mattered now. She finished her coffee, tied her hair back in a simple way, put on neutral clothes, not to look strong, not to look fragile, but to look like herself. She grabbed her keys and left. As she drove back toward the city, the sky began to lighten with muted shades of blue, the kind of dawn that wakes slowly. The streets were still quiet. perfect for what was about to happen. Clara had decided she would not have separate conversations, no fragmented explanations, no private manipulations. They broke the same thing together. They would face her together, not out of revenge, but out of completion. A story doesn't end when the truth is discovered. It ends when everyone is forced to see it. When she reached the building where Daniel and Melissa worked, her breathing remained steady, grounded. Her body seemed to know there was nothing left to fear. She entered the lobby with firm steps. A few people looked at her. Whether out of recognition or intuition, it didn't matter. In the elevator, she pressed the button for the executive floor. The numbers lit up one by one as the elevator rose. With each floor, her certainty grew stronger. This wasn't impulsive. It was necessary. When the doors slid open, Daniel was standing there. He looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes were red, tie crooked, posture collapsing. "Clara," he said, stepping toward her. She walked past him without slowing. "Get Melissa," she said. Daniel froze. "She's next door," he whispered. "But I don't think it's a good idea for you two to—" "Get her," Clara repeated. There was something in her voice, a tone Daniel had never heard from her before, a tone that did not allow resistance. He nodded, defeated, and disappeared down the hall. Clara entered the conference room. She had been there before, company dinners, work events, the usual corporate gatherings, but today the room felt unfamiliar, bright, sterile, too big, filled with memories that no longer belonged to her. Daniel returned with Melissa. The woman, her former friend, looked swollen-eyed, fragile, carrying shame or fear, or some mixture of both. But what struck Clara wasn't her appearance. It was that Melissa couldn't look her in the eyes. The three of them stood there in a long, suffocating silence. Clara broke it first. "You two," she said, giving equal weight to them both, "destroyed the same thing together. So you'll listen together." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Melissa folded her arms across her body, shrinking. Clara continued. "I saw you at the hotel, and before that I saw everything you tried to hide. I saw the altered documents. I saw the lies traded between you. I saw what you planned to do with my marriage and with everything we built." Melissa tried to interrupt. "Clara, I know nothing I say will—" "You're right," Clara said, cutting her off with quiet precision. "I'm not here to hear apologies or excuses. I'm here to end this." Melissa's posture collapsed slightly. Daniel spoke next, voice trembling. "Clara, I never wanted—" She cut him off with the same unshakable calm. "You never wanted to take responsibility. That's what you never wanted." Daniel lowered his gaze, finally hit by the weight of his own actions. Clara walked to the table, placed her hands on its cold surface, and said with a clarity that left no room for misinterpretation, "I know everything." The words hung in the air like a verdict. "I know about the months of betrayal. I know about the lies you told each other to justify the unjustifiable. I know about the documents. I know about the meetings behind closed doors. I know about the money you tried to move. And I know you both thought I would never find out." Melissa finally looked up. "Clara? I swear it wasn't intentional." Clara didn't laugh, but her silence hit harder than any sarcasm. "Not intentional," she repeated softly. "You had months to undo it, months to step back, months to not sign anything, months to not lie, months to not pretend you were my friend." Melissa pressed her lips together, fighting tears. Daniel took a step forward, but Clara raised her hand. That gesture that had become a boundary neither of them could cross. He stopped instantly. And then came the most important moment. The moment Clara claimed the narrative. She inhaled slowly. "I'm not here to argue. I'm not here to ask why. I'm here to make something very clear. You both lost the right to speak about me, about what I feel, about who I am, and about what happens to me from now on." The room felt heavy with her words. Daniel opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Melissa covered her face, crying silently. Clara turned toward the door. Her voice was steady as she delivered the last line. Not dramatic, not vindictive, but final. The truth didn't destroy my marriage. The lies destroyed the two of you." She picked up her bag, opened the door, and walked out. The sound of the door closing wasn't loud. It was an ending that marked the close of a chapter, and the beginning of one no one would ever write for her again. When the conference room door clicked shut behind her, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in months. It wasn't joy, it wasn't revenge, it wasn't lightness, it was something steadier, a kind of grounded serenity, solid and unmistakable, as if the air around her had finally aligned with the air inside her. She walked down the hallway slowly, almost meditatively. There was no hurry to leave, no urge to escape, no. Each step felt like a quiet affirmation that she had closed something fully, not just a marriage, not just a friendship, but the version of herself that had been living outside the center of her own life for far too long. Employees glanced at her as she passed, discreet, curious, sensing something different about her, but Clara didn't notice, not because she was distracted, but because for the first time in a long time, she was fully rooted in herself. Inside the elevator, she exhaled, a long, controlled breath that carried months of compressed tension. As the doors slid shut, she caught her reflection in the brushed metal panel. Her face was tired, yes, but beneath the exhaustion, there was something else, something that comes only after surviving a storm that wanted to drown you. There was her. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the lobby. She crossed through the glass doors and stepped outside. Late morning sunlight warmed her skin. A gentle breeze lifted a strand of her hair, and for the first time in months she noticed the smallest details: cars passing in the distance, the smell of fresh bread drifting from a bakery nearby, the muted warmth of the sun filtering through clouds. It felt like seeing the world through a newly cleaned window. She got into her car but didn't start it right away. With her hands resting on the wheel, she let her forehead fall lightly against it. She felt a profound exhaustion, not destructive, not collapsing, but the kind that signals stabilization, the kind that says, "You can rest now. The worst is behind you." She glanced at her hand on the wheel. It wasn't trembling anymore. It wasn't gripping with fear. It wasn't reacting from a place of survival. She inhaled deeply, closed her eyes, let the silence fill her. And when she opened her eyes again, her first decision came with unforced clarity. She wasn't going back to the home she shared with Daniel. Not that day. Not in the next days. Maybe not ever. She would return to her grandmother's house. Not because it was comfortable, but because it was hers. Because she needed a neutral space, a place untouched by lies, a place where the story hadn't been written by anyone else's hands. The drive there felt nothing like the night before. The scenery was the same, buildings, trees, familiar storefronts, but her consciousness was different. Everything looked less threatening, less imposing, as if she were finally stepping back into the world, not as a wife, not as a friend, not as someone orbiting someone else's gravity, but as the protagonist of her own life again. When she arrived, she set her suitcase down on the living room sofa and opened all the windows. Afternoon wind swept inside, stirring the curtains, filling the empty rooms with movement and breath. The house came alive. She walked to her grandmother's bedroom and opened the old wardrobe. The faint scent of the past drifted out. Not the scent of pain, but the scent of shelter. She grabbed a towel, fresh clothes, and headed for the bathroom. The shower was long, almost ceremonial. Hot water slid down her shoulders like a release, not washing away memories, but washing away the weight of them. She didn't cry. She didn't collapse against the tile. She simply let the water fall, her body slowly adjusting to the idea of rebirth. Afterward, she dressed in soft, comfortable clothes and stepped out onto the back porch. She sat in her grandmother's old wooden chair, bare feet resting on the cool floor, staring at the yard her grandmother once cared for with devotion. And there, in the stillness of the late afternoon, the future approached her quietly, not as a distant concept, but as a presence sitting beside her, gentle, patient. She realized something important. She didn't need to decide everything today, or this week, or this month. The end of a long chapter demands space. It demands time. It demands room to breathe. Clara finally reached for her phone. Unread messages flooded the screen, dozens from Daniel, nearly as many from Melissa. She read them slowly, one by one, not with pain, not with anger, but with the detached clarity of someone who finally understood what no longer belonged to her. One recent message from Daniel read, "Daniel, Clara, I know what I did is unforgivable, but please, don't tell my parents yet. I need to talk to them first. I need to explain things the right way." Clara exhaled, long and steady. The message revealed more about Daniel than any apology ever had. He didn't want to face consequences. He wanted to manage them. There's a vast difference between remorse and fear, and Daniel felt only the latter. Another message from Melissa. "Melissa, I don't know how I became this person. I always admired you. Maybe that's part of what happened. I wanted to be you, and I lost myself trying to replace someone you never stopped being." Clara read it. Let the words exist, and then let them go. The confession was real, but it wasn't redemption. She deleted the messages, silenced the phone. Put it away. The world could wait. Evening arrived slowly, coloring the sky with deep oranges that clung to the edges of the old house. Clara remained outside until the last trace of sunlight dipped below the trees. Inside, she turned on a warm light and prepared a simple dinner. She ate without urgency, not because she was hungry, but because feeding herself calmly felt like reclaiming something forgotten. After eating, she walked barefoot through the house. The cool floor beneath her feet grounded her in a way she hadn't experienced in months. She stopped in front of an old photograph of her grandmother. The older woman smiled softly, holding a pot of freshly picked flowers. It wasn't a wide smile, just certain, warm, rooted. The kind of smile from someone who knew that life, even when it collapses, always leaves small openings where light can enter. Clara smiled back, faintly, not out of happiness, but out of presence. And presence was more powerful than any fleeting joy. Later, she sat on the bed with a notebook she found in a drawer. She placed the pen on the first empty page and took a long breath. She didn't know what she was going to write. She only knew she needed to place something outside herself. She wrote slowly, "I am here." The words looked small on the page, but they weren't. They were an anchor, a declaration, not to the past, not to Daniel, not to Melissa, but to herself. She wrote a few more lines, scattered reflections on everything that had happened, everything that still hurt, everything she was slowly reclaiming. She wrote about the pain that still pulsed, but didn't define her anymore, about the fear that still lingered, but no longer dictated her steps, about the possibility, quiet, patient, steady, of building a life where trust wasn't something fragile she needed to guard constantly. By the time she closed the notebook, the house was wrapped in silence. Clara lay down, turned off the light, and let the darkness settle around her. But for the first time in a long time, the darkness wasn't threatening. It was rest. It was closure. It was the quiet beginning of something she couldn't name yet, but could already feel unfolding. She thought of the old paper she had found the night before, the one with her grandmother's handwriting. Silence is not absence. It is preparation. Clara closed her eyes. She was ready. Her chapter with Daniel and Melissa had ended, but her chapter with herself was just beginning.